Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, looking up information about the author of Creating Like the Heart is on Fire, Stories of Artists and Creative Endeavors in Trinidad and Tobago, it kind of reads like the backdrop of an experience that would lead into Andre Tanker's Forward Home. We're very happy to have this conversation with Adele James. Welcome, Adele. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
You know, I am doing really well. It's always good to be back home in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm happy to be here, especially after a couple years, due to COVID.
You understand? But give us a little idea, please, because you carried me back to school, making me think of reading Stuart Hall, The Eternal Other. And tell me a little bit about your experience of being Black in the United States, yet not African American.
Yeah, I remember starting school, and I was probably about 7 years old, and I was the only Black child in my classroom, and that was not something I had ever experienced. And I remember one of the children asking me, innocently, about how big my lips were. And that was not a question I had ever had before, but it left me feeling and other experiences that I was different, than other children. And because of my accent, not that I had a speech impediment, their inclination was to have me placed in speech class. So those were my early experiences of questioning aspects of myself that were natural, and from a perspective of, is there something wrong here?
And looking at some of those social cues that didn't necessarily apply directly to you, getting a thirst that you didn't necessarily know that you had, how did you try to fill that void eventually by making almost a pilgrimage, as it were, to Trinidad and Tobago?
It didn't really connect that directly. There was something maybe subconsciously that drew me here. My earliest memories of Trinidad and Tobago are tied in with my mother, and her passing when I was 7 is what precipitated that move. I have memories of going out on the glass bottom boats in Buku with her as a small child. And it was so long ago that the place we stayed at had a donkey. I happened to meet another artist, Joseph Bacchus, who has been my partner in doing this work. He is a master wood carver. And, we started off with there are all these great artists who aren't even known. Why don't we go find them? I'd wanted to do something about Joseph, and he's like, why don't we go find them? And that's what set this journey off. I think it's doing that whole process that towards the end, I really realized that it fed me in a way that I had not anticipated in learning about where I'd come from through the stories that these artists shared and learning about their work.
And in terms of that grounding that you speak about with your mother, I was thinking that you were going to talk about the blue bunny suit as well, but you didn't, so I guess we missed out on that. But talk to me a little bit, though, about the ability of art and culture to ground a person in purpose and understanding.
Yeah. That I came to this understanding in these interviews with these artists. And at the time, I was actually studying to be an executive coach. And there's this thing we talk about, powerful questions. And so it's about asking questions in a way that allows people to come up, with their own answers. And, what I saw in the pattern of how folks answered the questions was that art allowed them to access their spirituality often, but also to art and the creative process allowed them to touch places within themselves emotionally. And so for me, it became that. I found that the writing, because that's been my expression, the writing of thinking about how to communicate effectively what I'm saying, and then looking back at what I've done. But I think it's tapping into the creative piece, a part of you that it's not prescribed. You have to allow it to just be and happen. It is not a space of control. And some would say that, it's a space of allowing, I think, what's greater than yourself to guide you. That's been my experience, and that is what I heard a lot of the artists speak to. They take off, they go someplace else. It's almost like another dimension, and I think they're talking about spirituality.
And hopefully, this is a powerful question. What is the purpose? What's the driving force behind Middle Passage Arts?
Yeah. You know, what I came to see was that there's so much creativity. And specifically, I went after those folks who aren't known. I think there's one individual, who is known, but that those who, they don't have a choice but to create. To not create means to lose a part of themselves. And yet, because they have such a challenge in supporting themselves in doing the work here, the question is always present of, do I continue this or not? And some have stopped. So my intention is to bring this to a broader audience by sharing this, and having it published in the US. But I also ultimately would love to organize a traveling exhibit in the US of some of the work. So really it's about bringing attention, audience, for others to see the wealth of creativity that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago that goes beyond carnival, that goes beyond calypso, that goes beyond soca. There is so much of it when it comes to the visual arts.
And with regard to that, and speaking about that wealth, how important is representation to you? And having people see what they are, see what they can be, even thinking about this in the context of that 7-year-old girl who started school as the only black child in her class.
Yeah. That experience, is in part what led me to the work I do professionally. I do organizational development and I do racial equity work. And it's working with organizations on how they can transform themselves in order that, it's an equitable space. It is a space where folks of different persuasions, who are diverse, are seen and represented for what they have to offer. When you do not have that, you are leaving a gap. You are missing information. The picture is not full. And so, one of the things I've heard, which is, it makes me angry, is that Black art doesn't sell, or Caribbean art doesn't sell. And that's about the mindset. That's about a colonial mindset. And so for me in doing this, I think it's important, especially for people of color, to see themselves represented, and the way that these artists portray them, and not as objects, not as victims, but as fully empowered, intelligent, beautiful, creative beings.
And with that, we take a short break. We're speaking to author Adele James. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with Adele James, author of Creating Like the Heart is on Fire, Stories of Artists and Creative Endeavors in Trinidad and Tobago. And there's something that you said on the other side of the conversation, Adele, in terms of the artist does. That is who they are. And that lends to conversations about validation. I don't need a piece of paper from you to say that I am. I am because I do. But asking you about your gift, though, when did you realize that you had this gift, the gift of telling stories?
I'm still coming into that. Sometimes you do something and you don't really recognize it. I feel like as I've come to the end of this manuscript and I'm seeking to have it published, that part of, my journey is claiming, my own power, right, in this. And I think that it has only been really more recently. It's something that I did but starting to say now I am a storyteller. This is part of, and I think that that's a Trinidadian thing. I may not have the accent, but I think that that's a gift we have as Trinidadians. We are storytellers.
Makes me think of Paul Keynes Douglas. It's everybody parent want their child to be a doctor, a lawyer, but he's a storyteller. But we've spoken a lot about the context and the history and the backdrop. But tell me a little bit about the book. Thank you. I'm very grateful that Joseph Backus was able to inspire you like this. But tell me about the book. You went full 100 pages. What are some of the things? What are some of the people represented inside that 100 pages?
Yeah. So, to clarify, I am seeking and I have submitted proposals, and I am seeking a publisher in the US. So that's recently have done that. So that's the stage that it's at. And if you go to at Middle Passage Arts with an S, you can see what I've been posting about the different artists. We were all over Trinidad and Tobago, places that folks don't even necessarily go to these days. There was one gentleman we met who he uses nails for his paintbrush. Right here in Tobago, he carves these most intricate fish and birds using cow and bullhorn. In Trinidad, there is this family of coppersmiths, and they do most of the supplying to the airport. And Shaka, he's the new copperman. We didn't even have his name. We just had an idea that he lived, we thought we knew what village he lived in. And so we just rented a car, stopped at all these rum shops asking for him. Conversation breaks out, arguments with these guys sitting there with their stag, and their Carib about is it Copperman or Copperhead, until we finally found the person. Here in Tobago, there's Marcia Devines. And she is a retired art teacher, but her father was Edward Hernandez, who started the arts movement here in Tobago. And then there's Pearl Trim. I just saw the jewelry this woman was wearing. I had been invited to a dinner, and I went to Trinidad to meet her. And part of her story is that she was the first motorcycle policewoman in Trinidad and Tobago. So these are just some of the people and the art forms. And of course, there's Makemba Kunle, who runs Studio 66. He is more well known, but what I love about what Makemba does is that he opened Studio 66 as a way to support and cultivate, the work of other artists. And Joseph Backus, as I said, who is this masterwood sculptor. My bedroom door is carved by him. On one side, there's a full-size Bel Air dancer, and the other side, there's hibiscus and hummingbirds that I commissioned and he carved. So those are some of the people, and there are a total of 19 people, 18 stories, a glossary, because Americans who may not understand some of the language, that's included there to help them understand.
And you're saying this, and so like I've been to Studio 66 and just being blown away. So you take 2 steps forward, it's almost as though you see something different than when you take 2 or 3 steps back. But it's so much more than the art. This is what I'm hearing, Adele. You're getting stories and experiences of these individuals. And how did you feel kind of just going through and getting this? Because you're talking to me, my paws racing right now. So how was it for you to actually meet these people and interact with their work?
Yeah. One, I want to say I have a lot of gratitude because I have a lot of gratitude for all those folks because they don't know me from anybody, right? And this is just a passion project I took on with Joseph, and their openness and their willingness to have conversation. And I realized that this was not just an interview, it was really, in some ways, a witnessing, because I was asking questions and folks were talking about deeply held dreams and sometimes disappointments, and trusting that I would hold that in a way that was compassionate and respectful. And so I realized that these were not interviews. This really was witnessing. And, I understood afterwards, and what I hope I did was that the way in which I think I wanted to be seen and heard, as someone who's grown up in between borders, that it was my desire to be able to give that to each of these individuals. And so I keep up with folks and tell them what I'm doing, because this is self-funded. And so, hey, I want you to know where I'm at. Hey, here is the story I've written. And on this trip, I got to share the stories and have some of the artists read the stories and think back to when we had the conversations, so that they know that I am following through and keeping my word to what I said I would do.
And that is, I really appreciate that. But in terms of other people keeping up with the work that you're doing, there's a QR code that I want you to tell us about a little bit, please.
Yes. So, what I've learned is that it is not enough to have a good manuscript, right? That now social media plays so much into it. And there's a couple things I'm hoping to do. One, if folks can go to Instagram, and it's at Middle Passage Arts, MIDDLEPASSAGEARTS, and follow. So one is to grow the following. That's one thing that I want to do. And pass it on to folks, in the States, in Canada, in England, in Trinidad, Tobago, pass it on. But the other thing is that I want to bring attention to other artists. And so if you go to the QR code and you focus your camera on it, it will take you to a link. And so if you have some unique art that you would love to share, you are living here in Trinidad and Tobago, please share it with me. And I may be able to feature it on my Instagram page, the Middle Passage Arts page. And so, after doing this with the group of folks that I've met, really wanting to see and give an opportunity to share the creativity with others. And you hear there's a lot of different mediums. There's even architecture in this round. There's a Hindu temple and the story behind that that is featured. So yes, so focus on the QR code. If you go to the link in the bio for Instagram at Middle Passage Arts, you can also click on the link and it will take you to a Google Doc where you can fill out and we can follow up.
All right, and I really appreciate having this conversation, because I try not to have interviews, and it was really a pleasure having you peel back the curtain and having us witness the work that you're doing, carrying us along for the ride, so that we're able to find out more about ourselves through the articulations of these artists that you are discovering and sharing their work. So Adele James, thank you so much. More power to you. And on behalf of the entire team at TTT, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.